Planet Xylar, Vega Year 13 Interstellar Space. Aboard the Explorer Class X9, darkness permeates space. In the distance, millions of stars glitter like diamonds scattered across an endless black velvet cloth. But in this region of the galaxy, where light seems to be swallowed by dense cosmic dust clouds, everything becomes much more somber. Xylar, a planet hidden among ionized dust clouds, slowly rotating in the darkness like a silent gatekeeper of an ancient secret. Electromagnetic storms occasionally flash across the surface, creating faint blue rays that pierce through the ash-filled atmosphere. It is not a desert planet, nor is it a lush tropical jungle. It is something else. A strange world, beyond any rules Kane had ever known. And that's precisely why he was here. 3 Interstellar Alliance's Most Outstanding Researcher Awards traded for a state-of-the-art space exploration vessel, the Explorer Class X9. 3 self-reinforcing nano-titanium trophies sold to black market merchants in exchange for a Spectra X5 bioscan, the most sophisticated device an independent researcher could dream of. And now what? Right now, I could be sitting comfortably at a bar in Nexus Clursa, sipping a cold beer, pretending to sympathize with those project specialist guys analyzing errors in galaxy-level key projects. Those guys, their eyes always gleaming when they talk about strategic thinking, when in reality they probably don't even know how to mediate between 2 service robots, arguing about the order of clearing tables. Then they would raise their glasses, laugh heartily, pat each other on the back, as if they had just devised a strategy to save the entire galaxy. And sometimes, that's also a kind of happiness. But instead of enjoying life, he was alone, hurtling straight into this deadly void. Boom! Streams of hot gas swept along the hull, followed by waves of violent shaking. Kane was jolted back to reality as the ship shook violently, a series of bright red warning signals flashing across the control panel. The central screen began to display critical alerts: warning, navigation system failure. High-level magnetic interference. Abnormal gravitational force. Recommendation: adjust trajectory immediately. Damn it. Kane quickly gripped the controls, but just as he was about to make an adjustment, a violent tremor swept through the entire ship, throwing him hard against the control panel. Outside the window, streams of electromagnetic lightning swept across Xylar's atmosphere, forming intense streaks of light like giant electric snakes slithering in the air. Kane muttered, sweat pouring down his forehead as the communication system began to emit unusual static. Critical error: navigation system disabled. Anti-gravity engines out of control. This is not good. Although he had prepared for the worst-case scenarios, he never thought he would lose control just seconds after approaching the planet. The signal scanner display kept flashing erratically. It wasn't like any radio signal Kane had ever seen before. It wasn't stable. It didn't follow any known pattern. It was as if it was alive. Boom! An extremely powerful electromagnetic shock swept through the hull. All control systems shut down for a second, then rebooted with a series of chaotic codes. Critical error: main engine failure. Unidentified magnetic force pull. No way. Kane barely had time to scream before everything spun as the ship was pulled down at a terrifying speed. The surface of planet Xylar flashed in a blinding light, then disappeared into an endless night. Kane's mind hovered between vagueness and reality. A throbbing pain engulfed his consciousness, spreading from his skull down to every joint. His breath was heavy, as if a boulder were pressing on his chest, preventing the flow of air. A small sound arose, the clicking of a flickering control panel, then silence. Kane opened his eyes. His vision blurred for a moment, bright blue spots flickering in his eyes like remnants of the recent shock. He tried to move, but the pain in his shoulder and leg held him back like an invisible chain. He gasped for air and immediately realized something was wrong. The air on Xylar was denser than Earth's, its smell heavy, full of unfamiliar scents. A mixture of weeds, damp moss, and something metallic and burnt. An unpleasant sensation crawled up his throat. He coughed, the cough making his chest ache as if he had just been punched hard. Gradually, he became aware of his surroundings. Outside the shattered cockpit, darkness fell like a thick curtain, but it wasn't completely dark. Patches of bioluminescent moss spread across the ground, emitting a faint, soft, but also somewhat eerie blue light. Kane blinked, trying to regain his awareness. Glowing trees. Tall trees with pitch-black bark, their surfaces covered with green luminescent veins like giant blood vessels. The leaves overlapped, interwoven into thick layers, blocking almost all light from the sky. The ground beneath was covered with thick, unusually soft moss. When Kane moved, he felt like the ground reacted. Like it was watching him. No birdsong. No animal sounds. Only the sound of the wind whistling lightly between the leaves, along with a vague sound. Like something slithering somewhere just beyond the edge of his vision. Pain tore at his muscles, but he still managed to stand. Leaning against a warped piece of the hull, he looked around and felt his stomach clench. His ship had broken in two. The rear of the ship, where the main engine was located, was completely crushed under a giant tree trunk. Thick vines had already begun to crawl up the hull, as if they wanted to devour it. The front section, his cockpit, was partially buried in the thick moss, the blue light from the vegetation covering the shattered windshield. A few control panels were still flickering faintly, but the main system was completely disabled. He swallowed hard. No distress signal. No way to communicate. If he couldn't find a way to leave this place, he might never see his world again. Kane tried to suppress the rising fear, taking a deep breath, trying to steady himself. He needed to assess the situation, find something usable. His eyes quickly scanned the wreckage, and a spark of hope flickered. Under the pile of debris, not far away, was his Spectra X5 bioscan. At least I still have this. He crawled towards it. When he finally reached out and picked up the device, a sense of relief washed over him. The machine was still intact. Although the LEDs on the body were only flickering weakly, at least it was still working. Kane quickly checked oxygen levels, atmospheric pressure, chemical composition of the air. All within tolerable limits. He could survive here. At least for a short time. Kane was about to activate the bioscan mode to see if there were any creatures nearby. But before he could do that, something was watching him. It was not the sound of natural branches breaking. It wasn't the sound of wind rustling the leaves. The survival instincts of a man who had spent his life exploring strange planets immediately kicked in. His back stiffened, every nerve taut like a violin string. Don't make any sudden movements. Kane gripped the Spectra X5 bioscan tightly in his hand, as if it were the only weapon he had. Slowly, he turned around, the flashlight attached to his wrist shaking as it scanned the darkness. The weak light shone on a figure in the middle of the jungle. He held his breath. A creature stood there, silently. Green skin. A body that was toned yet agile. A perfect blend of speed, strength, and flexibility. Her hair was long, neatly braided, but with a few strands falling naturally, wild and alluring as if it had never been tamed. Red eyes glowing in the darkness like two burning gemstones. They were sharp, observing him without wavering, without blinking. She did not stand upright like a human. Her center of gravity was low, a posture ready to explode at any moment. She was not prey. She was the hunter. She wasn't wearing heavy armor. Her armor seemed to be part of her body, hugging every powerful curve, crafted from a unique biomaterial, a type of super strong plant fiber combined with organic minerals, both light and flexible. The glowing veins on the armor moved slightly, as if it had a life of its own, reacting to the environment and her emotions. On her waist, a curved dagger was secured, along with a small device emitting a faint light, possibly a weapon, or some kind of tool. Kane was stunned. His heart pounded in his chest, unsure if it was from fear or something else. She was beautiful, but not in the way humans define it. Not soft. Not weak. She possessed a primal magnetism, a form of wild power that drew anyone who looked at her in. Kane swallowed hard. This girl or creature was looking at him, as if assessing what he was. He didn't know if he was about to be killed, captured, or something else. But one thing was certain, he couldn't take his eyes off her. Kane took a small step back, trying to maintain some distance. Raising his hand in a gesture to stop, he spoke, his voice trembling but firm. "Hello. I am Kane Lyrian, a scientist from the planet Nexus Clursa. The girl did not respond. Her red eyes continued to look at him, revealing no emotion, no fear, no anger, just cold curiosity. Kane swallowed hard, reminding himself to stay calm. He tried a different approach, slower, clearer. He pointed to his chest, trying to enunciate each word, as if teaching a student who had never known English. Kane. Lyrian. Scientist. Nexus Clursa. The girl slowly raised her hand and pointed to her own chest, her sharp gaze never leaving Kane. A single, short word escaped her lips, as if introducing herself.
Kayla.
Kane breathed a slight sigh of relief. At least he got some response. But just as he was about to say something more, she took a step forward. The distance between them was now only a few meters. Kane felt enveloped by her powerful presence. The air around them seemed to stand still. Kane felt something was wrong. No warning signs. No hesitation. Kayla stepped close to Kane, too close by human standards. Kane reflexively stepped back, but his back hit the damaged hull behind him. No escape. His breath hitched as she stood right in front of him, so close he could feel the warmth from her body. "What are you going to do?" Kane's words were cut short when Kayla suddenly reached out. Her hand pressed against his chest. Kane froze. Her hand was warmer than he expected. She pressed lightly, feeling the rapid heartbeat under his shirt. Her fingers moved, lightly touching his collarbone, then sliding down his arm, gently squeezing to test his muscles. Kane swallowed hard, his body stiff. "You." His voice choked. "What the hell are you doing?" Kayla didn't answer immediately. She tilted her head, her eyes still as sharp as a scientist studying a strange creature. She ran her fingers down Kane's arm, feeling every muscle, then placed her hand on his neck, pressing lightly on his artery. Kane felt his pulse pounding like a war drum. Kayla suddenly frowned, her eyes full of questions.
Are humans this fragile?
Kane was bewildered. Huh? Just a touch makes you blush? Kayla tilted her head, her expression completely serious, as if she had just made a scientific observation. Blush? Kane was stunned, realizing his face was burning. Not from illness, not from heatstroke, but from the way she approached him, as if personal space didn't exist. "It's not," Kane stammered, trying to stay calm, but his voice still broke. "Damn it, don't get so close to me." Kayla raised an eyebrow, a spark of amusement flashing in her eyes.
Is that so?
Suddenly, Kayla snatched the bioscan from Kane's hand. "No. Don't do that," Kane shouted, reaching out to grab it back, but he was too late. Bop! Kayla's punch was so fast and powerful that Kane didn't have time to react. A flash of light exploded in his head, then everything went black. His body collapsed to the moss-covered ground, his consciousness drained in a single second. The test was over. A sharp, hammer-like pain slammed into Kane's skull, pulling him out of the darkness of unconsciousness. His consciousness returned slowly, waves of throbbing pain running down his spine, his muscles numb as if they had been hit by a giant steel block. "Damn it." He groaned softly, feeling the cold, damp ground pressing against his back. Everything gradually came into focus through his blurry vision. Kane tried to move, but immediately realized his hands were tightly bound. Glowing vines wrapped around his wrists and ankles, securing him to the thick moss below. The air around was too quiet. The feeling of being watched immediately flooded his mind. Kane swallowed hard, trying to glance around. The phosphorescent light from the moss and the tall trees emitted a faint glow. In the darkness in the distance, a figure sat on a rock, observing him with sharp eyes. "Kayla." She didn't say anything, just rested her chin on her hand, her red eyes glowing coldly like a hunter waiting for its prey. He squinted at her, then gave a dry, bitter smile. "You knocked me out and then tied me up?" His voice was hoarse. Kayla slightly raised an eyebrow, not answering immediately. She just observed him, her gaze unwavering. The feeling of being assessed like an animal in a laboratory made Kane shiver. "Hey." He tried to struggle, but the bindings were too strong. "What are you going to do with me?" Kayla still didn't answer, but this time, her lips curled up slightly in an enigmatic smile. She stood up from the rock, slowly walking towards Kane, her feet making almost no sound.
Are you humans that weak?
Kayla said.
Just a light punch and you're out?
Kane frowned, hissing through his teeth. If you call that light, I'm afraid our standards are different. She stopped right in front of him. Kane could feel her breath lightly on his face, warm but also dangerous. Then, unexpectedly, she leaned down, resting her hand on Kane's thigh, looking directly into his eyes. The distance between them was now only a few centimeters. Kane tensed his entire body, not out of fear, but because of the way she was testing his reactions.
Why are you here?
Kayla asked, her voice low, almost a command. Kane tried to remain calm. I was researching a signal. I didn't mean to trespass. Kayla narrowed her eyes.
Research? Alone?
She lowered herself further, her red eyes gleaming in the darkness. Kane tried to turn his face away, avoiding her gaze. But Kayla wouldn't let him escape. She raised an eyebrow, her expression full of amusement.
You're flustered. Or are you humans not used to being approached like this by a woman?
Kane gritted his teeth, his eyes still not looking directly at her. I'm just not used to being hit and then tied up like an animal, Kayla chuckled softly.
You're not an animal.
Then she reached out, her fingertips lightly touching Kane's collarbone. He flinched, his eyes widening. Kayla tilted her head, her eyes mischievous.
Your heart is beating faster now.
Kane stiffened, his lips pressed tightly together. Just as the tension between them became almost unbearable, a deep, rumbling sound came from afar. Thump! 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 The ground shook slightly, as if something very large was moving through the forest. Kayla's attitude changed instantly. She turned sharply, her sharp gaze quickly scanning towards the direction of the sound. Kane looked at her, a feeling of anxiety rising in his heart. What the hell is that? He asked, his voice urgent. Kayla didn't answer. Instead, she drew her dagger from her belt, quickly kneeling down to cut Kane's bonds. Pulling him to his feet, she pointed in a direction in the forest.
Follow me, if you don't want to die, Dr. Kane.
Kayla didn't answer, just turned and walked away, leaving Kane bewildered, running after her, feeling that things had only just begun. Kayla moved like a graceful panther, each step swift, precise, and almost silent. Kane, on the other hand, was almost being dragged rather than running on his own. He gasped for breath, his voice hoarse from exhaustion. What's chasing us? Kayla glanced at him for just a second, her eyes showing no pity or concern. She simply replied coldly.
You don't want to know.
The answer only added fuel to Kane's panic. He quickly glanced back, but in the darkness he only saw giant figures slithering towards them, sounds like rolling stones echoing throughout the forest. The ground cracked beneath each of their steps. The light from the bioluminescent moss patches reflected off the giant bodies, each creature at least 3 to 4 meters tall, with bodies as if sculpted from black stone. Strange muscles rippled beneath the hard shells, emitting crackling sounds like stones colliding. They had no eyes. No mouths. No sign of a normal sensory nervous system. They moved in a terrifying way. Wherever they passed, the surrounding vegetation withered, as if drained of life. Thump! A guardian suddenly slammed a giant arm down on the ground, creating a shockwave that made Kane lose his balance. Kane tripped over a protruding root, lost his balance, and thud! He slammed into Kayla's back. She stopped, turning to look at him. Kayla's sharp red eyes seemed to say,
What did you just do?
Kane stammered, trying to calm down. I didn't mean to. This terrain is not easy to navigate. Kayla didn't answer. She just raised her hand and lightly tapped Kane on the forehead. Tap. An action that was somewhat reprimanding. Kayla suddenly turned back, pulling him up in a second, but not without giving him a sharp glare.
If you keep running like this, I'll let them eat you.
Kane opened his mouth, but he couldn't retort because Kayla was already pulling him to run again. Just when Kane felt like he couldn't take another step, a strong hand grabbed his wrist.
This way.
Kayla's voice was sharp, leaving no room for hesitation. Kayla suddenly pushed him hard into a small crevice, a hidden corner between rocks covered in bioluminescent moss. Kane slammed his back against the damp rock surface, a cold sensation running down his spine. He opened his mouth to protest, but a sharp look from Kayla immediately silenced him. She put a finger to her lips, signaling silence. Outside, the ground shook, the heavy stomping sounds echoing, followed by small shockwaves spreading across the ground. Kane held his breath. Each giant shadow passed by the crevice, the light from the bioluminescent moss patches reflecting off their massive bodies. Kayla's body pressed tightly against his, her soft yet powerful form like a shield protecting him from the Guardian's hunt. Her warm breath brushed lightly against his neck, so close that every breath she took synchronized with his racing heart. There wasn't the slightest hint of fear. The scent of Kayla lingered in the air, a wild fragrance, not like artificial perfume, but like a natural scent from her body, a blend of green moss, a hint of earth, and something cool like the night wind. Kane swallowed hard, trying to remain calm. But Kayla suddenly tightened her grip on him. She tilted her head, her long braided hair unintentionally brushing lightly against Kane's neck, whispering close to his ear, her voice almost a breath.
Don't move.
Kane froze, completely losing control. The surroundings gradually quieted, leaving only the sound of the wind rustling through the glowing leaves. The ground no longer shook. The heavy, terrifying footsteps of the primal guardians now only echoed faintly in the distance, then disappeared into the darkness. Kane was still holding his breath, the feeling of pressure, like being suppressed, almost paralyzing him. The moss around them gradually glowed again, a sign that the environment here had stabilized. The danger had passed. Kayla nodded slightly, but instead of moving away from him immediately, she narrowed her eyes at him, as if she had discovered something interesting.
You're easily flustered.
Kayla casually released her grip, acting as if everything that had just happened was nothing special.
Oh, right. There's no reason to hold you anymore.
Kane stumbled, almost falling, quickly grabbing onto the rock wall. Not everyone is used to being pressed against a rock wall, he mumbled. Kayla raised an eyebrow, but didn't respond. She simply stood up, stretching slightly as if she had just finished a light workout. So, what the hell was that trying to trample us? Kayla crossed her arms, her sharp gaze looking in the direction the Guardians had gone.
The primal guardians of Xyler. They existed before our civilization was even recorded.
Kane blinked, not quite digesting the information. Wait, you're saying they existed before your history? Kayla nodded.
They don't care who you are. They don't judge. They only know one thing: anything that doesn't belong to Xyler must be eliminated.
Kane's face turned pale. So that means Kayla raised an eyebrow meaningfully. And pray? She didn't answer immediately. Instead, a faint smile appeared on her lips, as if she was enjoying the moment Kane realized the truth. Kayla continued to lead Kane through the forest. Each of Kane's steps sank slightly into the moss-covered ground, feeling like he was walking on something that could expand and contract. The bioluminescent plants flickered around them, but this light wasn't entirely stable. It changed in a rhythm. Almost conscious. Kayla led Kane up a gentle slope. When they reached the top, Kane was out of breath, resting his hands on his knees. Where are we going? Kayla didn't answer right away. She walked forward, to the edge of a cliff, and stopped. Kane slowly approached, and as soon as he looked down, his breath caught in his throat. Below them, the giant trees spread out like biological sails, gently swaying in the wind. Their smooth leaf surfaces reflected the brilliant phosphorescent light, creating a spectrum of colors from jade green, amber yellow to deep purple, as if the dawn were trapped within each leaf. Looking closer, Kane realized that the tree trunks were not separate, but instead, they connected to each other like a living neural network. Some of the trees were not stationary at all, but slowly undulated, as if they weren't actually purely plants. A giant branch suddenly twitched, then slowly extended. Damn it. What is this? Kayla didn't turn around, just silently observed the scene before her.
Xyler.
Beneath the forest canopy, a layer of mist hovered, reflecting the light from the surrounding plants, making the entire landscape look like a glowing ocean of clouds. But when Kane observed more closely, he realized this mist wasn't still. It was moving. Not because of wind. Not because of gravity. But as if it had a purpose of its own. Kane couldn't help but take a step back. This definitely isn't normal fog. Kayla followed his gaze, then nodded.
It's part of the forest.
Kane blinked, not believing his ears. You mean it's alive? Kayla glanced at him, a faint smile playing on her lips.
We are alive too, aren't we?
Kane didn't know whether to feel comforted or even more terrified. This planet held too many things beyond his imagination. He sighed, sitting down on a moss-covered rock, trying to collect himself. Meanwhile, Kayla said nothing, just observed the sky, then casually took out the knife from her hip, and began to cut vines to build a shelter. Kane watched her work skillfully, without a hint of hesitation, as if this were just a natural part of her life. And him. He was still trying to get used to the idea that there was an entire layer of living mist hovering above his head. After a stressful day, Kane really needed a little time to take care of personal needs. He scanned the area, looking for a place that seemed private. I'll be back in a bit, Kane said, standing up. Kayla only glanced at him, then nodded faintly. Kane walked into a hidden corner behind a large rock, checked again, and then breathed a sigh of relief. But when he turned back, Kayla was still standing there, arms crossed, observing, as if he had just announced he was about to test a new, cutting-edge technology, not attend to a very basic need. Kane paused, stammering, "Could you turn around?" Kayla frowned, her expression completely uncomprehending.
Why? This is my planet.
He couldn't believe he was having to explain about privacy to an alien warrior. Because this is a personal matter. I mean, very private. You can't just stand there and watch. Kayla blinked.
I don't care.
Kane was stunned, his eyes wide as if he couldn't believe what he had just heard. It's not about whether you care or not. It's about me caring. Kayla shrugged, as casually as if this were the most obvious thing in the world.
Your species has strange rules.
She mumbled, but finally turned her back, although she still stood not too far away. Kane returned to the camp, still not completely over his bewilderment. Kayla was sitting on a rock, sharpening her knife, her eyes still as sharp as ever. He sat down opposite her, clearing his throat. So, is there anything your species considers private? Kayla paused for a second, as if considering the question. Then she glanced at him suggestively, smirking.
You'll have to discover that for yourself, Dr. Kane.
After settling into the shelter, Kayla climbed a giant ancient tree, as graceful as a nocturnal panther. She moved smoothly, precisely, each step completely natural. Kane stood below, observing instinctively, and realized he was staring for too long. He couldn't help but notice her every fluid movement. Just then Kayla turned around unexpectedly.
What are you looking at, Doctor?
Kane was startled, as if caught red-handed. He immediately looked away, trying to appear focused on something very important on the ground. Nothing. I was just studying the geological structure of this place. Kayla stared at him, her eyes full of suspicion.
Really?
Kane nodded repeatedly, as if wanting to affirm to the entire universe that he was completely innocent. Kayla shrugged, putting her hands on her hips, her voice teasing.
I see the concept of privacy for humans is sometimes quite flexible, isn't it, Dr. Kane?
Kane winced. I object. I haven't been flexible about anything. Kayla turned away, but still glanced at Kane suggestively.
If you say so, I'll temporarily believe you.
Kane shuddered. Not because it was cold. The air in this area. Something was very wrong. Since leaving the ravine, he and Kayla had been moving non-stop. But now, Kayla suddenly stopped. Kane noticed the change immediately. Although he didn't fully understand the reason, the survival instincts of an explorer helped him recognize a clear truth: something was watching them. Kayla slightly raised her hand, signaling to stop.
Stop.
Her voice was low and sharp. Kane swallowed hard. There was no birdsong. There was no wind. There was no rustling of leaves. Only deadly silence. A silence that he had felt before when facing the most fearsome predators. "Damn it," Kane whispered. Kayla didn't answer. She just lowered her center of gravity, her hand resting on the knife at her hip. Kane felt as if hundreds of invisible eyes were watching them from the darkness. Then he realized. They weren't coming from the darkness. They were coming from something else. About 10 meters away from them, there was a figure. It stood there. Motionless. No clear features. No clothes. No face. Just a gray form, like a statue made of solidified mist. Kane felt his heart beat faster. What the? Then it began to change. Its skin rippled. Biomatter twisted, like clay being molded. A few seconds later it had the shape of Kayla. From the height, the body contours, to the metallic green skin color, everything was perfectly replicated. Only one thing was different. The eyes. No emotion. No sign of consciousness. Just an empty copy. Kane shuddered. And then, another entity appeared. This time, it took the shape of himself. Kane froze. He felt like he was looking into a distorted mirror. The copy in front of him looked like him, but wasn't him. It moved jerkily, like a malfunctioning puppet. "Damn it. What is this?" Kane mumbled. Kayla didn't hesitate. She drew her knife, lunging forward. The blade swung down, her copy mimicked her perfectly. Clang, the two knives met, reflecting the flickering light from the forest. Kayla gritted her teeth. No. It's copying. It has no real strategy. But just then the Kane copy attacked. Kane didn't have a knife. But his copy had a strange weapon, a blade that grew out of its arm. Kane quickly backed away, but his copy glided forward like a nightmare. It slashed horizontally. Kane ducked to avoid it, but the blade cut a small line on his shirt. The copy mimicked Kane's movements, making it impossible for him to predict its next action. The Kane copy lunged again. This time, Kane realized something. It was reacting to his movements, but it was only mimicking. "It can't attack first," Kane shouted. Kayla glanced at him. "Are you sure?" Kane's copy twitched, as if trying to read his movements. Kane closed his eyes, holding his posture, not moving. The copy also stood still. It didn't know what to do. Kayla realized.
It only reacts when there's an action first. That means if we don't do anything, it can't attack either. Kayla didn't hesitate.
She did something the copy couldn't predict. She grabbed Kane's collar, pulling him close. Their faces were only centimeters apart. Kayla's breath brushed against Kane's skin. He froze. Their copies began to contort violently. They couldn't copy a real emotion. Crack. Crack. Cracks appeared on their skin. They roared silently, then shattered into dust particles. Kane gasped. "Could you let go of me now?" Kayla looked at him for a second, then smiled faintly.
"You're blushing, Doctor."
Kane mumbled, "I'm not." But inside, he knew something had just changed. Kayla looked at the remaining dust from the copy, her eyes sharp.
"They're not ordinary creatures."
Kane nodded, feeling the instincts of a scientist awakening. Something is controlling them. Kayla turned to look at Kane. They both had the same thought: they were not the only danger on this planet. Kane took a deep breath, his chest feeling tight after the bizarre confrontation. The cloned creatures had been destroyed, but the feeling of unease clung to him like a ghost. He glanced at Kayla. She stood there, her red eyes reflecting the phosphorescent light from the moss at her feet, her face not revealing too many emotions. But Kane could sense. She was also more alert than before. They were not the only danger on this planet. Silence enveloped the two of them. The wind blew through, carrying an unusually cold chill. Kane looked around. The glowing moss patches still flickered in the darkness, but this time, he realized something was different. The space seemed to be getting more and more suffocating, as if the atmosphere was gradually changing in a way he couldn't explain.
"Do you feel that?"
Kane spoke up, his eyes still scanning the forest. Kayla didn't answer immediately. She narrowed her eyes slightly, taking a light breath. "The air is changing," she nodded.
"We should leave this area immediately."
Kane didn't argue. After everything they had just been through, he completely trusted her survival instincts. They left. About an hour later, Kane realized the environment around them was changing. The trees became sparser. The towering trees were replaced by black, rock-hard shapes, covered in glittering golden dust. The ground beneath his feet was no longer soft like the thick moss before, but became hard, cold, and barren. The bioluminescent green light reflected from the glowing plants was no longer as bright as before. Instead, a faint light seeped between the cracks in the cliffs, creating streaks of light like the veins of a giant creature fossilized millions of years ago. Before him was no longer a wild forest full of life, but a dead land where nature and time seemed to have frozen in an eternal moment. The fossilized trees reached high like gray stone towers, their surfaces cracked with faint glowing veins like frozen lava. Some of the trees were no longer intact, broken or worn into smooth blocks of stone, as if eroded by something more than time. The ground beneath their feet was also no longer soft, but hard, barren, with cracks spreading like dead veins stretching to the horizon. But what made Kane feel most uneasy were the statues. Kane approached a large rock, but as he got closer, he realized it wasn't an ordinary rock. It was a statue. A giant statue, carved in the shape of a tall, gaunt creature, with large, glowing eyes. Every detail on the creature's face was still intact, as if it had just turned to stone a moment before. The statue's empty eyes looked straight at Kane, making him feel like he was being watched. "What is this?" Kane whispered, lightly touching the rough surface of the statue. Kayla stood behind him.
A lost civilization.
Kane turned back, frowning. "You mean, this place used to have people living here?" Kayla nodded slightly.
Generations ago, my tribe passed down stories of those who came before, creatures that existed before we even appeared. No one knows how they disappeared. Only that they left behind these ruins.
Kane took a breath, his eyes scanning the surrounding area. There wasn't just one statue. Everywhere, between the fossilized trees, a series of different statues stood scattered, each statue in a different pose, some kneeling, some standing, some raising their hands as if to resist an invisible force. Kane felt a chill run down his spine. They were petrified. While alive? Kayla was silent for a moment, then said softly.
Possibly.
Not only were there statues. Strange characters were carved on some of the fossilized trees, twisting lines like snakes running along the bark, emitting a faint, dark purple light. Kane approached one of the trees, reaching out to touch the characters. As soon as his finger touched, a slight electrical surge ran through his body. Kane startled, quickly pulling his hand back. Kayla frowned.
What are you doing?
I don't know. Kane shook his head, looking down at his hand, the burning sensation from the characters still lingering on his fingertips. He turned to Kayla. These characters. Do you understand them? Kayla shook her head.
No one in my tribe can read them,
she said.
They've been here longer than anyone alive.
Kane frowned. But before he could say anything more, a cold wind blew through the fossilized forest. And a sound echoed from afar. A low, deep sound, like a giant creature. Or something moving in the darkness. Kayla immediately tensed, her hand tightening on the knife at her hip. Kane felt the hair on the back of his neck stand up. Nothing moved. Nothing appeared. But his instincts screamed that they were no longer alone. He turned to Kayla. Did you hear that? She nodded slowly.
We should keep moving.
Kane didn't need another reminder. He quickly followed Kayla, but still couldn't take his eyes off the mysterious statues. They were petrified when alive. If that was true, what had done that to them? They continued to walk. Leaving the statues behind, Kane noticed the environment changing once again. The fossilized trees gradually gave way to denser foliage, but Kane didn't feel any safer. Kayla led the way, each step as light as a predator. Kane followed, trying to stay as quiet as possible. But he knew something was still watching them. And then before Kane could realize what was happening, they were surrounded. From the shadows, tall figures emerged, weapons raised, sharp eyes aimed directly at Kane. Xylarian warriors. The darkness between the trees was suddenly torn apart. From the dense foliage, dozens of Xylarian warriors appeared, each of their steps on the soft ground making the bioluminescent moss fade as if drained of life. They didn't shout. They didn't roar. They just approached silently, but terrifyingly. Cain froze. He didn't know how many were surrounding him, but he could clearly feel those eyes sharp, wary, locking onto his every slightest movement. Kayla didn't move immediately either. Standing a few steps in front of Cain, she drew her weapon, a small spear, looking no different than a short metal rod. Cain blinked. Wait. That's it? He had expected something more savage, a bone spear, a broadsword. But what Kayla held was too small, too refined. Then click. In an instant, the spear extended. From a tiny piece of metal, it smoothly expanded, stretching into a spear taller than Kayla. The blade lit up with a faint blue glow. Along the shaft, glowing veins spread like living blood vessels. Cain was stunned. Technology. Not crude weapons. Not outdated tools. But a masterpiece of minimalism and lethality.
Stand still.
Not threatening. Not angry. But carrying absolute authority. From the shadows, a man stepped out. Karin, this man was taller than the other warriors, his muscles as solid as sculpted stone, his dark green skin reflecting the glowing veins running along his arms. His long silver hair, like silver light from the moon, fell straight down to his shoulders. His eyes, a bright, blazing yellow, as radiant as fire, pierced through the space, touching Kayla. On Karin's body, there was no heavy armor like the other warriors. Instead, he wore a cloak made from the scales of some creature, emitting a light shimmer, both majestic and dangerous. On his waist, two curved short swords were secured, the hilts carved with ancient characters similar to the ones Cain had seen on the fossilized trees earlier. Kayla looked directly at Karin, her voice steady but carrying a hint of coldness.
He's not an enemy.
Cain glanced at Kayla. He? She called him he in front of her warriors. As if she wanted to maintain a certain distance between herself and him in the eyes of the Xylarians. Karin raised an eyebrow, his gaze unchanged.
Not an enemy.
Karin's voice was deep, but without any doubt.
Then what is he?
How to convince an alien warrior that he was not a threat? Cain was about to speak, but a blade was already pressed against his neck. So fast that he didn't even realize who had drawn the sword first. Cain didn't dare swallow. The cold tip of the blade pressed against his skin, so sharp he could feel every air molecule moving around it. Karin spoke slowly.
He is an intruder.
No.
Kayla spoke immediately.
He.
Karin raised his hand, stopping her. Kayla shut her mouth. Cain was surprised to see her actually remain silent. Karin had enough power to make Kayla stop? Karin looked directly at Cain, his eyes unwavering.
We will not kill him.
Cain breathed a slight sigh of relief, but immediately, Karin continued.
At least, not yet. Take him to the village.
Cain froze. Bop. Cain started as he felt a pat on the head, not too hard, but enough to make him stumble a bit. Karin stood there, his face cold, his voice full of warning.
Walk slowly, human. This ground can devour the careless.
Under the dim sky of Xylar, Cain walked in constraint and vigilance. Both of his arms were tied with a type of glowing vine, emitting a faint light like a biological fiber. The Xylarian warriors surrounded him, their formation moving tightly like a pack of predators escorting their prey back to the lair. He glanced to his side. Kayla walked parallel to him, but her face was expressionless. No comforting glance, no words of protection. She was like any other Xylarian warrior, keeping silent and moving forward. Cain clearly felt the tense atmosphere. He knew he wasn't a welcomed guest. To them, he was nothing more than an intruder. The stares of the Xylarian warriors carried wariness and hostility. Cain silently sighed. He didn't blame Kayla for her attitude. He understood the conflict in her heart at this moment. She had fought to protect him, but that didn't mean she was willing to go against her entire tribe for him. The first sign of change appeared when the dense forest gradually receded. The towering trees with black trunks were now sparse, giving way to a strange terrain that Kane had never seen before. The ground beneath his feet was softer, no longer the thick moss he was familiar with. It emitted a shimmering light, as if it were made of thousands of biological veins flowing beneath. Kane bent down to observe more closely. This was not rock, nor ordinary soil. Each of his steps made the ground vibrate slightly, not like touching mud, but like walking on a living entity that was sleeping. A chill ran down Kane's spine.
Don't stop.
Kayla's voice was curt, but it was the first time she had spoken to him since they left the forest. Kane quickly followed. Strange structures gradually appeared ahead. At first glance, they looked like giant buildings, but the closer Kane got, the more he realized they were not inanimate structures. Giant biological domes undulated amidst the landscape, their surfaces vibrating gently in the wind like the skin of a giant breathing creature. Glowing plant fibers intertwined, forming soft but sturdy walls that could adjust themselves to the weather. Some of the large domes opened up as Kane passed by, revealing inside large living areas, where Xylarians moved gracefully on winding corridors, formed from branches that adjusted their shape. This was not a primitive tribe. This was a transcendent civilization, a perfect combination of technology and biology, an ecosystem that Kane had never seen anywhere else in the galaxy. Kane was overwhelmed by the scene before him. He had seen many different planets in his career, but had never encountered a civilization that could harmonize with nature so perfectly. It was unlike anything he had ever known. No metal. No concrete. No glass or artificial buildings. Everything here was alive and changing with the rhythm of the planet. Under the gentle light of the biological domes, the Xylarians began to appear. They stopped on the suspended corridors, observing the group of warriors entering. Their eyes full of suspicion and alienation. Whispers arose. Human. What is he doing here? Kayla brought an intruder back? Kane felt their gazes pierce him like sharp blades. A chill ran down Kane's spine. He was used to being judged when entering strange planets, but the feeling this time was not like a scientific expedition. The long corridor gradually darkened as Kane was escorted through by the Xylarian warriors. The flickering blue light from the vines on the ceiling created moving shadows with each step, like invisible monsters lurking. No one spoke. Kane's footsteps echoed on the stone floor, out of place amidst the terrifying silence. Each step seemed to pull him further away from any chance to explain, to be understood, to be forgiven. Kayla remained behind. Kane turned his head to look at her again, a faint flicker of hope that she would do something. But she didn't move. Her gaze was still fixed on him, but without any expression for him to cling to. Just cold emptiness, as if she had locked away all emotions. The door ahead opened. Not a metal or mechanical door like he had seen in ordinary prisons. This was a door formed from tightly interwoven vines, glowing faintly, then suddenly separating as if breathing. A cold draft rushed out from inside, carrying a strange feeling of oppression. Kane was pushed hard inside. The vine door closed behind him. The air in the room was thick, as if it wasn't just space, but a living entity watching him. Kane scanned the room, sensing the glowing characters on the walls moving slowly, like the flow of an energy he couldn't understand. This was not just a prison. This was something more ancient, more dangerous. Kane swallowed hard, looking up ahead. There were no more Xylarian warriors, no Kayla, just darkness, the invisible sigh of the room, and absolute loneliness. At the center of the room, a small woman sat on an intricately carved stone chair. Her appearance, though not imposing like the surrounding Xylarian warriors, still exuded authority. Her hand held a scepter made of living material, glowing faintly whenever she moved. Her red eyes shone with a sharp gaze, as if to pierce through Kane's mind. This was undoubtedly the person to whom all eyes were directed. Elder Alira. She didn't speak immediately, just stared at Kane, letting the silence stretch out tensely. Kane felt as if the air around him was solidifying, each breath becoming heavy. He swallowed hard, cold sweat starting to break out on his forehead. She spoke, her voice deep but carrying a weight that seemed to press Kane to the ground.
Human, why do you dare set foot on Xylar?
Kane swallowed, feeling as if every word she spoke echoed in the space, resonating with his pounding heart. He tried to regain his composure, but her sharp gaze and the surrounding Xylarian warriors made it extremely difficult. Damn it, he mumbled softly, then told himself, tell the truth. Survive. I didn't mean to trespass. I just came here to research, he said, trying to keep his voice calm. Alira didn't let him finish. Her voice cut in, sharp as a blade.
Research? You humans always use that excuse.
She stood up slowly, each of her steps making the scepter glow brighter, as if responding to her aura.
Do you know how many times those like you have come here with promises? And in the end, what did they bring? Betrayal and destruction.
She came closer, her eyes piercing Kane. Her voice dropped, each word like a heavy blow.
Do you think you're different? Humans are weak but greedy creatures. You don't stop until everything is destroyed.
Kane tried to open his mouth to object, but his throat seemed to close up. Those accusations, even though he wasn't involved, still made him feel guilty. I didn't come here to make war. I just wanted to understand this planet. It's so wondrous, and I just wanted to learn. Alira stopped, her eyes narrowing as if to read Kane's every thought.
Learn.
She repeated, her voice full of sarcasm.
So what have you learned from this place, human?
Kane took a deep breath, trying to regain his confidence. He replied, his voice slow but sincere, that you are unlike anyone else in the galaxy. You are in harmony with nature, far beyond any civilization we have ever known. I didn't come here to destroy. I just wanted to understand you. Alira stared at him, saying nothing. But Kane felt she was evaluating every word he had just spoken. From the corner of the room, Kayla stepped forward. Her voice rang out, cold but resolute.
He's not like the others. He has no weapons, no purpose of conquest. I have checked and tested him.
All eyes in the room turned to Kayla. Kane looked at her, feeling the tension in her every step. But she still stood tall, her sharp red eyes unwavering.
He's just a scientist.
She continued, her voice stronger.
He's curious, not greedy. I believe he is not an enemy.
Alira looked at Kayla for a long time, her eyes showing no emotion. Then, she turned back to Kane, her voice lowering, but still carrying an undeniable authority.
You say you came to understand us.
Another elder, with a stern demeanor and a cold, deep voice, interjected, we have heard similar promises from humans before. And the result? Betrayal. She signaled to the Xylarian warriors.
Imprison him. We will evaluate him further.
Kane was dragged away, but before stepping through the door, he glanced at Kayla. Her gaze was still unwavering, but he could sense the worry hidden deep in those red eyes. The stone door closed behind Kane, closing the first interrogation, but opening up new dangers awaiting. The silence in the black stone room seemed to weigh heavily on Kane. The dim light from the glowing characters on the wall was only enough to cast his shadow on the cold floor. They pulsed slowly, like the breath of an invisible entity, but offered no warmth. He sat leaning against the hard wall, arms crossed over his chest, trying to stay calm. But his mind couldn't stop. What will they do with me? Is Kayla still on my side? Is there any way to escape this situation? Everything happened so fast. An hour ago he was a lost scientist on a strange planet, now he was under the judgment of a civilization he knew nothing about. Damn it. A footstep sounded. Not too rushed, but sure. Kane looked up, and a figure appeared right in front of the prison cell entrance. Under the faint blue light, a pair of bright red eyes looked at him. Kayla. She stood there, silent for a long time. Her face didn't show any clear emotion, but her eyes were complex. Struggling. Finally, she spoke only one sentence, short and emotionless.
The council wants to see you again.
Kane stood up, glancing at Kayla, but she said nothing more. He gritted his teeth, took a deep breath, and then stepped out, letting two Xylarian warriors escort him through the long corridors. The giant door in front opened. It wasn't made of metal or rough stone like the structures of humans. It was a living entity. 2 giant panels, over 10 meters high, their surfaces smooth as if carved from a type of organic mineral, glowed from within. Biological veins ran along the door. In the very center, a crystal hovered, emitting pulses of energy whenever someone approached. The bright veins on the surface of the door suddenly moved faster, the color changing from blue to bright gold, as if it were reacting to the presence of an outsider. The 2 masses of matter separated like giant flower petals blooming, each layer of bright veins folding gracefully, revealing the space behind. The light from inside the interrogation room poured out, reflecting on the vaulted ceiling above, creating diffused rays of light like auroras hovering in space. Before Kane was not just a simple room but the center of power of the Xylarian civilization. The dome above was not a static structure but a living canvas of light and matter, constantly changing as if it were breathing with the planet. Streams of phosphorescent gas flowed along the biological veins, painting ancient characters that glowed brightly in the darkness, each line of Xylar's memory flowing right in this space. At the center of the room, a structure resembling a primal crystal hovered in mid-air, emitting a stream of light around it, like a spiritual gem holding the will of the entire tribe. And surrounding it, on high platforms carved from black stone mixed with organic metal, were the elders of Xylar. They did not simply sit on simple slabs of stone but on biological thrones, where matter and entity merged. Each throne emitted its own distinct light, reflecting the aura and authority of the person sitting on it. Some thrones had glowing vines wrapped around them, as if responding to the breath of their owner. Others had a semi-transparent shell, inside which streams of moving light were contained, like a mist holding centuries of Xylarian wisdom. Elder Alira sat in the highest position, not simply a chair, but a structure in the shape of a giant flower, made of living quartz, each petal spreading out as if blooming with each beat of time. The giant crystal on her throne vibrated gently, emitting a low rhythm, like the whispers of ancient generations. The other elders all exuded a distinct authority. Some sat silently, their eyes reflecting the light of the ancient texts revolving around the room. Others touched the biological objects beside their thrones, as if connecting to an invisible network of knowledge. No one spoke a word. Kane felt his heartbeat slow, as if this room had its own gravity, drawing all his will and emotions inward. This space was not just a place of judgment but a moment of intersection between the past, present, and future of Xylar. And at the center of it all Alira looked down at him. Her eyes flashed like 2 stars in the night, and when she spoke, the veins on her throne glowed brighter, as if the planet itself were listening to her judgment.
Human.
Her voice rang out, slowly, but carrying an undeniable weight.
We have thought.
She paused for a moment, then leaned forward.
If you are truly not a danger, you will have to prove it.
Kane froze. A shiver ran down his spine. Prove it? He asked, trying to keep his voice calm. I don't know what you want. I told you, I only came here to.
You have spoken.
Alira interrupted, her voice still calm but containing an undeniable coldness.
But the Xylarians do not judge by words. We only believe in actions.
A long silence followed that statement. Kane looked around. No one objected, no one spoke. Clearly they all agreed with this. He slowly exhaled, realizing he had no other choice. So. He spoke, each word heavy. What do you want me to do? In front, Elder Alira stood up, the scepter in her hand glowing faintly, creating faint lines of light spreading across the stone floor. Her aged eyes looked directly at Kane, carrying a weight that made him feel as if he were being judged by the very soul of this planet.
You will undergo a ritual.
Another elder, perhaps the sternest of the council, jutted his chin, solemnly.
An ancient test we use to assess the honesty of outsiders.
Alira raised her scepter, the tip emitting gentle pulses.
Bring forth the crystal of memories.
A group of Xylarian warriors entered, carrying an object covered by layers of glowing biological silk. The fibers seemed to emit their own light, wrapping around the object like a protective membrane. Kane squinted as they placed it down in the middle of the room. They pulled the silk cloth away and what appeared before him made Kane hold his breath. A giant crystal, almost as tall as a grown man, emitting a faint blue light. Its surface was not smooth like glass, but rippled as if there was a stream of energy constantly changing inside. The light emitted from the crystal was not fixed, it pulsed with a rhythm, like a breathing creature. Alira slowly walked to the side of the crystal, her voice echoing with power.
The crystal of memories is not just an object.
She placed her thin hand on its surface, and immediately, the crystal flashed brighter, reflecting on her dark cloak.
It is the memory of this planet. Those who touch it will see what their minds truly feel, and the truth will be revealed.
Kane swallowed hard. The memory of the planet? If this was true, it could be a form of biotechnology that recorded everything that happened on Xylar from millennia ago. But how did it work? Alira turned to look at him, her eyes as if directly challenging his soul.
If you are truly not a danger, the crystal will react.
She paused for a moment, the light from the crystal reflecting on her face, deepening the wrinkles on her cheeks.
If not, your fate is sealed.
Every eye in the room was fixed on Kane. He felt his throat go dry. This was no longer an interrogation. This was a judgment. Kane quickly glanced at Kayla. She stood at the edge of the room, her arms crossed over her chest, her face expressionless. But in those red eyes, he could see a deep wariness. Kane swallowed, his heart pounding like a war drum. He couldn't refuse. One wrong step, and he could be considered a liar. He raised his hand. His palm was cold and sweaty. He placed it on the surface of the crystal of memories. And everything exploded in his mind. A surge of energy shot out, running through his entire body like a living electric current. Kane trembled slightly. It felt like something was scanning his mind, reading his every thought, his deepest feelings. He gritted his teeth, trying not to pull his hand away. For a moment, everything went dark. No sound, no light. Just an endless night. Then the first images appeared. At first, they were just faint streaks of light, like fragments of a broken dream. But then they gradually became clearer. Kane saw a vibrant forest, trees emitting a gentle bioluminescent light. He saw the first Xylarians. They didn't build cities of metal or concrete, they shaped nature to their will, creating living structures like the breath of the planet. Everything blended together perfectly. But then, the sky of Xylar was torn apart. Giant spaceships appeared, casting shadows over the glowing forest. Kane felt a sharp pain in his head, as if he were living through these memories himself. The images changed rapidly, battles erupted. Light from weapons tore through the sky, trees burned to ash. Kane saw the Xylarians fighting against an enemy, but they did not have war technology. They were slaughtered. Then, a moment that changed everything. A deal was made. The ships departed. The Xylarians were left on their own planet, with nothing but ruins. And finally the last image slammed into Kane's mind like a powerful blow. Human ships were leaving Xylar, leaving behind a devastated planet. Kane opened his eyes wide, his heart pounding in his chest. He couldn't breathe. This was impossible. He took a step back, his eyes still fixed on the crystal emitting a flickering light. Humans were once here? His voice was hoarse, almost fragmented. But why doesn't anyone know about this? He turned to Elder Alira, his eyes full of horror. She had known all along. The light from the crystal on her forehead flashed, reflecting as if it too were reliving the pain of centuries.
Your kind once set foot on Xylar. As friends.
The room fell into a deadly silence. Every Xylarian elder looked at Kane not as an invader, but as a witness to a dark history. She looked directly into Kane's eyes, the eyes of someone who had witnessed the entire history being twisted.
You betrayed the pact.
Kane took a breath, trying to remain calm, but his voice still trembled. But there must be some mistake. Our history doesn't record this. Alira leaned forward, her eyes as deep as the night Kane had just seen in the crystal. Her voice dropped, each word like a blade piercing Kane's mind.
Your history is the history of the strong, always burying the truth of the weak.
For a moment, no one spoke. The light from the crystal spread throughout the room, illuminating every stone platform, every stern face of the council. Everything had changed. An elder stood up, his hand gripping his scepter tightly, his sharp gaze looking at Alira.
He has seen.
His voice rang out, as if trying to find an explanation.
That proves he is not lying.
The council whispered in an ancient language, the low, deep sounds echoing throughout the room like a cursed incantation. A forgotten prophecy, a buried truth, and a lost man who accidentally touched the memory of an entire planet. Elder Alira stood at the center, her deep red eyes reflecting the distant memories that Cain could not reach. Her voice was low but resonant, each word carrying the weight of centuries.
Human, what you have seen cannot be denied. But truth does not equal trust.
She lightly touched the glittering crystal on her scepter, the blue light spreading like the living veins of the planet. Cain swallowed hard, feeling as if he still carried the images from the memory crystal, the human ships, the betrayal, the war, the downfall.
You have proven that you are not lying.
Alira continued.
But that doesn't mean you are not a threat.
A whisper spread through the crowd of elders, suspicious eyes still fixed on Cain like sharp knives. He felt the atmosphere become heavier, as if the pressure of this entire tribe was pressing on his chest. Alira quietly observed Cain for a long time, then she turned to Kayla.
You brought him here, Kayla. Now you will be responsible for him.
A deadly silence enveloped the room. Cain blinked, not sure if he had heard correctly. But Kayla didn't react immediately.
Responsible? What does that mean?
Kayla's voice was calm, but Cain could sense the hidden tension within it. Alira raised her scepter, her voice unwavering.
If he betrays us, if he endangers the tribe, you will pay with your life.
A shiver ran down Cain's spine. Kayla still didn't change her expression, but Cain noticed her hands clenching tightly. She slowly bowed to the council, her voice calm but carrying absolute determination.
Honorable Council, I brought him here, I will also be responsible for him. If he betrays us, I will be the one to deal with him.
The entire room fell into absolute silence. A few members of the council glanced at each other, but no one spoke. Alira still observed Kayla, her eyes revealing a hint of consideration. If he can bring this truth back to Nexus Clursa, if he can make humans face their own past, the council will reconsider our trust in them. Alira tilted her head slightly.
Do you believe that one human can change history?
Kayla didn't avoid her gaze.
I don't put blind faith in humans. What I want is a chance for us to decide our own future, instead of letting the past bind us all.
Alira looked at Kayla, she nodded.
Then, you have chosen your path.
A soft tap from the scepter sounded, as if marking a sentence just passed. Kayla bowed again, then stood up straight. Cain swallowed hard, trying to find a way to say something, but he knew, no words could change this decision. Kayla had just risked everything. For him. Karin led Cain out of the council chamber with a lighter mood, but still couldn't help feeling like he had just escaped a life or death interrogation. He took a deep breath, the fresh night air soothing his tense nerves. Cain raised an eyebrow, unable to hide his surprise at Karin's less hostile attitude. He half-jokingly said, with a mocking expression, "What's this? Suddenly you're friendlier? Or am I imagining things?" Karin didn't answer immediately, just gave Cain a sharp glance, as if assessing his trustworthiness. Then, he raised one eyebrow, his voice laced with sarcasm.
If the council has decided, then I have no reason to doubt any more. But don't forget, human. I won't take my eyes off you.
They walked through corridors interwoven with glowing plant fibers, like a stream of biological energy flowing everywhere. Cain couldn't take his eyes off this magnificent architecture, both wild and full of scientific principles. Karin, noticing Cain's curiosity, involuntarily spoke, his voice full of pride.
What you are seeing is the perfect balance between nature and technology. No destruction, no exploitation. We live with this planet, not forcing it to serve us.
Cain nodded, his eyes still attentively looking around, reflecting admiration. A self-sustaining ecosystem. Almost a living entity. This is truly something that humans can only dream of. Karin shrugged casually, his eyes still maintaining an observant look.
That's right. And that's also why we don't easily let anyone trespass.
They stopped in front of a door covered with living vines. When the two approached, the vines automatically retracted, revealing a room inside. Kane stepped in, his eyes widening as he saw the magical space before him. The walls of the room were made of living stone slabs, their surfaces faintly glowing like moonlight, synchronizing with the breaths of the person inside. The ceiling curved softly, the crystals above emitting a gentle light, forming images resembling a starry sky. In the corner of the room was a small pool, clear water trickling through the cracks of the living stones. In the center, a bed was made of soft plant fibers, curving like a protective cocoon. Karin turned to Kane, his eyes this time less cold, but still maintaining seriousness.
This is your place. Just remember one thing, don't destroy anything here. This ecosystem can repair itself, but it's not always. Gentle with the careless.
Before Kane could open his mouth to ask, Karin turned back, slowly pulling a small object from his waist. The Spectrum X5 scanner. Kane blinked, realizing it was the device he had lost when he was captured. The light from the touch screen on the device reflected on Karin's face, highlighting his sharp eyes.
Take it.
Karin held it out in front of Kane, his voice devoid of emotion. Kane swallowed hard, then slowly reached out, his fingers touching the device. When he grasped it, Karin didn't immediately let go.
Don't think this is trust.
Karin tightened his grip slightly, his voice low, enough for Kane to understand the message clearly. The Council wants you to prove you're not a threat. If you betray us, I will be the one to end you. Karin was silent for a moment, his yellow eyes flashing with a barely noticeable hint of amusement. Before leaving, he turned his head back, his voice dropping slightly.
Sleep, human.
The plant door closed behind Karin, leaving Kane alone in this magical room. He sat down on the soft bed, breathing a sigh of relief. His eyes looked up at the ceiling, which opened to the night sky, allowing starlight to shine in. Kane sighed, lying down, for the first time feeling a little relaxed since setting foot on Xylar. A small beep sounded from the Spectra X5 bioscan. Encrypted message, sent from Nexus Clursa sender, unknown priority, urgent.
Kane. Are you alive? I've been trying to contact you for days.
Kane frowned, turning on the screen. Eliza appeared on the screen, her face full of worry and fear. Eliza? What's wrong? Eliza lowered her voice, her breath rapid.
I dug deep into the Interstellar Alliance Science Council's archives and discovered something terrible. Everyone who went to Xylar before you when they returned to Nexus Clursa. They disappeared.
Kane was stunned, his heart skipping a beat. Eliza continued, her voice trembling.
Not missing on Xylar. They returned safely. But then, one by one, they disappeared without a trace. No official reports, no one remembers them. As if they never existed.
Kane gripped the communication device tightly, trying to stay calm. Is it possible they just changed their identities or left? Eliza shook her head, her eyes filled with worry.
Kane. This isn't a normal incident. This is a deliberate purge. Someone. Or something. Is erasing everyone who knows about Xylar.
Kane felt a chill run down his spine.
I don't know who's behind this, but they found me? Kane, you have to get out of there now. Don't go back to Nexus Clursa. It's not safe there anymore.
Suddenly the signal was jammed. The screen distorted, then the image changed. Eliza was attacked by a group of masked people entering her lab. Sounds of breaking objects, screams. The last image Kane saw, a man in black armor punched the communication device, the signal cutting off completely. Kane was numb, his eyes still fixed on the now dead screen. Heavy breaths echoed in the quiet room, as if the entire space were pressing down on him. Suddenly, the biological door opened gently, the light from the corridor outside spilling in, pulling Kane back to reality. He looked up, trying to remain calm, but the feeling of anxiety still gripped his mind. Kayla stepped in, holding an exquisitely prepared tray of food, as if each dish were a work of art from nature. Her appearance brought a sense of calm, contrasting sharply with the storm of emotions raging within Kane. Kayla entered. Kayla's outfit had changed. A soft fabric made of plant fibers hugged her body naturally, not too revealing but still exuding strength. Her hair was down, shimmering under the light from the crystals on the ceiling. In her hands was an exquisitely prepared tray of food, as if each dish were a work of art from nature. Fruits that shimmered with vibrant colors, from orange, red to purple, seemed to be lit from within. They were cut into delicate slices, layered to form a flower. In the middle of the tray, a jade green grain was arranged in a spiral, sprinkled with small, glittering, bioluminescent leaves, giving off a gentle mint scent. A warm soup, glowing golden, as if made from mashed roots and blended with natural spices, emitted a sweet yet enticing aroma. Larger leaves, stuffed with seeds and small fruits, were neatly arranged alongside, as if inviting Kane to enjoy. Finally, a glass of pale purple liquid, its surface smooth as velvet, reflected the gentle light, like a sweet dream contained in a natural glass made from transparent tree resin. This food tray had no meat, but was full of freshness and allure. Kayla stepped closer, causing Kane to instinctively take a step back. Her gaze did not leave him, her voice soft but firm.
Do you know that I vouch for you before the council? Our culture places great value on what they protect.
Kayla paused, her sharp eyes locking onto Kane's.
There is a responsibility attached.
Kane felt his heartbeat quicken, not from fear, but from something deeper. Kayla didn't explain what that responsibility was. Instead, she bent down, picking up a small piece of fruit from the tray. Without rushing to give it to Kane, she held it suspended in front of him, her eyes full of challenge.
Try it,
she said, her voice soft as a breath, but also sharp as a blade. Kayla just looked at him, not answering, waiting for his action. A drop of water from Kayla's hair rolled down, following her collarbone and disappearing into the skin below, creating a mesmerizing movement. Kane unconsciously clenched his fist, feeling as if all his reason had been swept away by that image. Kayla didn't miss it. She noticed the confusion in Kane's eyes, and a smile flashed across her lips, both playful and provocative. Kayla tilted her head, her bright red eyes looking at Kane.
What are you looking at?
Her voice was soft, but there was a clear hint of challenge. Kayla reached out. The distance between them vanished in a brief but explosive moment. Kayla did not wait. She dominated. Led. Her assertiveness stunned Kane. The initial movements were tentative, then quickly became harmonious. Their bodies found a common rhythm, a dance of instinct and harmony. No words were spoken. Intertwined, blended rhythms, a flow of emotion overflowing, sweeping them into an irresistible moment. It seems like I passed the Xyler cultural test? Kane teased, but still a little breathless. Kayla closed her eyes, smiling faintly.
Possibly.
A connection that transcended differences, transcended the boundaries between two species, opening a new path that no one had dared to walk before. Kane woke up, feeling a cool softness brushing against his skin. The lazy warmth still lingered on the fabric beside him, like the trace of a fire that had just subsided after a long night. He opened his eyes and saw Kayla sitting nearby, her long hair cascading down one shoulder, a few strands gently touching his hand like strands of early morning light.
Good morning, scientist.
Her voice rose, both relaxed and containing a hint of mischief. Kane narrowed his eyes, trying to maintain a serious expression. I don't think a Xylerian warrior is in the habit of sitting and enjoying the sunrise like this. Kayla smiled, her eyes sparkling like sunlight filtering through leaves.
Not everyone has the opportunity to share Xylerian culture in such a special way.
Kane chuckled, but before he could reply, Kayla stretched, her movements both graceful and deliberate, like a panther waking up.
Get up,
she said, stepping off the cloth from last night, her figure gliding like a breeze, fleeting but leaving an unforgettable aftertaste.
We have a trip this morning.
Kane yawned, muttering, to test my ability to adapt to the local habitat? Kayla picked up a piece of fruit from the tray, its outer skin shimmering as if covered in a layer of luminous dew. She rotated it between her fingers, then suddenly tossed it towards Kane. "No," she smiled softly.
So you can stop asking questions and enjoy this planet for a bit.
The sun of Xylar was not as bright as Earth's, but its light pierced through the tall trees, creating moving patches of shadow like living creatures. Kane strode across the unfamiliar terrain, his feet stepping on the soft, velvety vegetation. The ecosystem here indeed had a strange rhythm. Everything seemed to adjust itself to suit each other's existence. The leaves gently closed as they passed, the glowing flowers retracted for a moment, then bloomed again as soon as they were far away. Kane walked and quietly memorized every detail. Although he was familiar with the extraordinary things in the universe, every step on this planet still made him feel like he was entering a fairy tale land, where nature still retained mysteries that humans had never touched. And then Kane saw it. A stream stretched out before them unlike any stream Kane had ever seen. The water was not only crystal clear, but also emitted a gentle blue light, rippling like tiny galaxies. Small waves lapped against the black rock shore, creating shimmering ripples like millions of crystals floating in the air. The mist rising, blending with the light from the phosphorescent creatures floating on the water's surface, they changed color with each ripple, sometimes turquoise, sometimes mystical purple. A gentle breeze blew through. The giant leaves above swayed, gently contracting as if breathing. The ground beneath Kane's feet was not even still. The luminescent moss patches gently swayed with the rhythm of the wind, emitting a faint light like an abstract painting. Kayla silently sat on a large rock by the stream, her bare feet lightly touching the cool water. Her long hair shimmered with a green hue under the natural light of Xylar, making Kane momentarily forget that she was not human. Kane stood not far away, but close enough to feel the change in the atmosphere. Kayla at this moment was no longer the ever-tough warrior, not the authoritative hunter. She was just a woman lost in her own thoughts. "Why did you bring me here?" Kane spoke, breaking the silence. Kayla didn't answer right away. She reached out to scoop up some water, her fingers gently stirring, creating glowing ripples that spread out.
At first, I thought you were just an intruder. A problem to be dealt with. But now...
She paused, her eyes still fixed on the water. Kayla did not answer immediately. She scooped up water, her fingers stirring gently, creating glowing ripples that spread out. The water's surface reflected the shimmering light on her skin, like small nebulae slowly drifting across the sky.
Now, I'm not so sure anymore.
Kane frowned. Not sure about what? But Kayla didn't answer right away. Instead, she suddenly stood up, her thin garment gliding with each movement. Then she stepped into the water. The cold stream embraced her, emitting a faint glow that reflected on her green skin. Droplets of water clung to her shoulders, rolling down her strong yet feminine back. Kayla turned, looking directly at Kane.
Do you want to swim?
Kane blinked, and before he could even think, a strong tug pulled Kane forward. He only saw a flash of light reflected in Kayla's eyes, a rare mischievous gleam before gravity lost control. Cold water enveloped Kane. A half smile.
Relax, we don't eat scientists.
Kane didn't even have time to react. Then his feet slipped on the slippery rocks at the bottom of the stream. Kane's body lost balance, and for the second time that day he fell into Kayla. Kayla's body was no longer a support. She didn't keep Kane upright. But on the contrary, she relaxed, letting Kane's weight pull them both down into the water. The water surface erupted. Blue light spread along the expanding ripples. The whole world turned upside down in a brief moment. All sound was muffled. Everything seemed to slow down. Then before his eyes, a completely different world. Glowing coral-like reefs, shimmering like miniature galaxies. Small creatures swam around him, their thin wings like living coral, moving rhythmically with his breath. Waves of glowing water bubbles, rising from the underground cracks, forming blue columns of light piercing through the stream. Kayla was hovering in the water. The water seemed like the breath of a giant creature, flowing slowly, caressing every movement. Her long hair was like soft silk ribbons in space. Her red eyes slowly opened, looking directly at Kane, a calm, mysterious gaze. There was no longer any mockery. No more frowns or unpleasant looks. Only silence. A moment that stretched out like eternity. Kayla turned, gliding effortlessly like a creature blending into the water. The light reflected on her skin, blending with every graceful movement. Kane quickly kicked his feet, trying to swim up. When his head broke the surface, she was already standing there on the shore, her long hair still wet, reflecting the light from the stream. Kane gasped, wiping the water from his face. "Damn it, why did you pull me down here?" Kayla just raised an eyebrow, her hand gently smoothing her wet hair. Her red eyes narrowed as if she had just discovered something interesting.
I saw your eyes? Glued to me.
Kane's cheeks flushed. "I was just curious about your culture. I mean, you pulled me into the water like that, I just wanted to know." "Oh. Do Xylarians do that often?" Kayla chuckled softly. For the first time, Kane heard a real laugh from her, not a sarcastic smirk, not cold indifference but a soft, almost natural laugh.
Xylarians don't pull anyone into the stream without a reason.
Kane was still standing in the water, his body still not fully adjusted to the cool temperature. Kayla gently smoothed the water droplets clinging to her skin, looking at him with a mischievous look. But then a faint sound came from the forest. Kayla turned her head immediately, her eyes becoming sharp. Kane also heard it, a very small sound, but unnatural. And then, from the darkness, a group of Xylarian warriors emerged. They didn't rush in, they didn't shout accusations, they just stood there, their eyes full of astonishment and disappointment. Kayla didn't move. She didn't try to explain, didn't turn to Kane to hide anything. One warrior stepped forward, Karin. His voice was cold, but he didn't need to raise it.
"So, this is your real reason?"
No one spoke. Kane could feel the atmosphere weighing down on both of them. Instinct told him to back away, to explain, but Kayla acted first. She took a step forward, standing tall, facing Karin and the other warriors. She didn't turn to Kane. She didn't need to look at him to know that he was worried. She just said, her voice calm but strong,
I love him. And that is not a crime.
Kayla was escorted back to the Xylarian Council immediately after being discovered. No chains, no imprisonment, but clearly, she was facing an unofficial trial. Kane was forced to follow behind, separated from her by the Xylarian warriors who were closely monitoring him. Although he was not considered a prisoner, their gazes towards him were ice cold. Kayla did not resist. She showed no anger, nor any hint of regret. She just kept a calm expression as she entered the center of the council. The Xylarian elders sat around, their faces stern, some even carrying a clear disappointment. The oldest elder, one of those who had previously supported Kayla, crossed his arms and looked at her. His voice rose, slowly but as sharp as a blade.
"You once said that the Xylarians must have the right to decide their own future. You said that we cannot let the past bind us. But now..."
He paused for a moment, his eyes piercing her.
"It's because you love him, isn't it?"
Kayla didn't avoid that gaze, nor did she react angrily. But these words had made the atmosphere even heavier. Another elder, a more conservative one, shook his head, his voice carrying a clear disappointment.
"If so, then your argument is completely worthless. Because it doesn't come from reason, but from personal feelings."
Kayla remained silent, listening. But the accusations didn't stop.
Are you fighting for Xyla, or are you fighting for yourself? Do you want to change tradition, or just want to justify your mistake?
Each question was a sharp cut. The conservative elder slammed his fist on the stone table, his voice echoing in the council space.
You are putting personal feelings above the interests of an entire people.
The air in the room thickened, the Xylarian warriors and other elders staring at Kayla, waiting to see how she would respond. She glanced at each elder, each Xylarian warrior in the hall.
A Xylarian cannot be separated from their emotions. We don't have to choose between reason or emotion. We can have both.
Kane had remained silent throughout the debate. Not because he had nothing to say, but because he knew this was not his fight. But when he saw Kayla standing alone facing the entire council, a simmering anger rose in his chest. Cain took a step forward, about to speak. But immediately, a Xylarian warrior stood in front of him, his hand resting on the hilt of his weapon. The most conservative elder turned to look at Cain, his eyes full of distance.
This is Xyla's business. Outsiders have no right to speak here.
Elder Alira, the only one in the council who did not clearly show opposition or agreement, closed her eyes slightly as if considering. When she opened her eyes, her sharp gaze swept over Kayla, then stopped on Cain.
Reason can make decisions, but if it has no emotion, it is just cold calculation. Emotion can be a driving force, but if it is not guided by reason, it is just blindness.
She paused for a moment, her eyes piercing Kayla.
So how do you distinguish between balance and a love that makes you lose yourself? Kayla?
No one answered. No one dared. Elder Alira looked at the other members of the council, her voice steady but not heavy.
We have lived with the past for so long that we are afraid to face a different future. But if the truth is not on our side, are we really protecting this tribe?
She turned to the Xylarian warriors standing nearby.
Bring the crystal of memories here.
The space seemed to quiet for a moment. A few elders seemed unhappy, but no one dared to object immediately. After Elder Alira's words, the crystal of memories was brought into the council. Kayla and Cain were both surrounded by Xylarian warriors, but they were no longer prisoners, at least until the truth was revealed. The council watched closely, half expecting the truth, half fearing that it would shatter the foundation of their beliefs. Elder Alira quietly stepped forward, her old but bright eyes following Kayla and Cain. In the council, the atmosphere was so tense that one could almost hear the heartbeats of those standing nearby. She placed a hand on the crystal of memories, its transparent outer shell reflecting a turquoise glow, reflecting gentle rays on her face.
For centuries.
Alira spoke in a calm but resonant voice, so that everyone could hear.
The Xylarian species has always prided itself on its fighting ability, its strength, and its absolute loyalty to the tribe. We view personal feelings as a weakness. A warrior is not allowed to let emotions cloud their judgment.
She paused, her gaze sweeping over the other elders who were silent, then slowly shifting to Kayla.
But a warrior is not a machine. They have a soul, they have aspirations, they have choices. And perhaps they also have the right to love.
Whispers broke out in the council, but Alira raised her hand, signaling for everyone to remain silent. She turned to Cain, observing him for a long time before continuing.
A love between a human and a Xylarian warrior has never happened in our history. But never happened does not mean it is wrong.
She looked back at Kayla, her voice slow, each word as if etched into the surrounding space.
But how do we know if it is balance? Or just an infatuation?
Her aged hand gently stroked the surface of the memory crystal, the light from it flashing, reflecting her solemn gaze.
There is a way to answer that.
Alira stepped back, signaling to both of them.
Place your hands on this.
Kayla did not hesitate. She stepped up, her hand strong but firm touching the crystal. Cain took a deep breath, his eyes glancing at Kayla before also placing his hand on it. The moment their fingers touched the surface of the crystal, a blinding flash of light erupted. The rays spread out like golden threads, reaching every corner of the room. Space seemed to stretch, distort, and then suddenly, everything plunged into a vortex of memories. Beside him, Kayla still stood firm, but her bright red eyes widened, reflecting the strange light emanating from the crystal. The space around them gradually melted away, the sharp lines of reality blurring like a painting washed away by water. Then the first image appeared. A vast battlefield opened before them. The sky of Xylar that day did not have a gentle blue color as it did now, but was tinged with a deadly red. Spaceships hovered in the sky, not of the Xylarians but of humans. Xylarian warriors screamed, charging into battle with everything they had. But the enemy never showed their faces. A ceasefire order from the Interstellar Alliance rang out over the communication channels. A voice echoed across the battlefield.
We can no longer maintain this alliance. Xyla no longer fits the overall vision of the alliance. We will withdraw.
Immediately, the entire human fleet disappeared from the battlefield, leaving Xyla alone. Thousands of Xylarian warriors fell from being betrayed. Kayla clenched her fists. She looked around, seeing the Xylarian warriors who had once placed their trust in humans falling in despair. Many roared in anger and pain as they saw their comrades abandoned in the midst of battle.
This is what we had to endure.
Kayla mumbled, her voice dropping. But Kane noticed something. A new stream of images appeared, separate from the battle. Everything flashed by. Now, they stood in an underground research facility. Giant pipes ran along the walls, inside which were faintly glowing blue liquids. High-tech screens displayed the parameters of an unclear entity. In the middle of the lab, a giant biochamber, with something sleeping inside. Genesis 9. Kane and Kayla held their breath as they saw it. A voice from memory rang out.
Project Genesis 9 has gone beyond control. We can no longer control it. We must seal this place before it awakens.
They saw a group of scientists rushing to enter commands on the control panel. One of them shouted.
If it gets out, not just Xylar, but the entire Alliance won't be able to control it. Seal it immediately.
A horrifying scene unfolded. The screens flashed red warnings, panicked scientists fled. A few didn't escape in time, they were sucked into the giant machine, disappearing into the darkness. Genesis 9 was not a pure machine. It was a living entity. The next image was of the sealing gates being closed, locking Genesis 9 underground. But before the door closed completely, Kane glimpsed a pair of eyes opening in the darkness. Space shifted again. Now they were no longer in the distant past. This was the present. They stood in a modern conference room, with the symbols of Nexus Clersa hanging on the walls. But not the entire Nexus Clersa government, only a small group of leaders. A man stood up, his voice cold.
We can't let the Xylarians know the truth. If they find Genesis 9, we will lose complete control of this sector.
Another man nodded.
We have to find it first, activate it, and use it as a strategic weapon.
Kane realized this wasn't an official Nexus Clersa meeting. This was a secret meeting, a group within the Nexus Clersa government plotting to seize Genesis 9. Not all of Nexus Clersa agreed with this. Some high-ranking officials didn't know about this conspiracy, or had been deceived. Another voice spoke.
We have a problem. Only humans can unlock the old system. If we don't have anyone, how can we activate it?
The last image appeared, a ship approaching Xylar, with the symbol of an inverted triangle with two arcs surrounding it. Kane felt as if an invisible fear had gripped him. The elders were stunned by what they had just witnessed. A conservative elder stood up, his eyes sharp.
How do we know this is real? This could be another human manipulation. We have hated humans for centuries. How can we now trust an outsider like him?
Many elders agreed, whispering, doubting. Elder Alira stepped forward, her eyes burning with determination.
The crystal cannot lie. The memory of this planet cannot be manipulated. What are you afraid of? Afraid that we have wasted centuries hating the wrong enemy.
The atmosphere in the council became tense, some began to waver. Karin, who had once opposed Kane, clenched his fist. He stared at the crystal, then spoke in a hoarse voice.
If this is true, then the real enemy is not humans or Xylar, but those who have manipulated history.
Some Xylarian warriors nodded in agreement, but the conservatives still did not accept the truth. A shocking explosion rang out, shaking the very ground. Bright red rays tore through the night sky of Xylar. Kane and Kayla hadn't even left the council when a wave of intense heat erupted from afar. A Xylarian warrior rushed in, his face pale. We are under attack. An army from the sky is descending. Kane and Kayla rushed outside. The scene before them made them freeze for a moment. The sky was ablaze with the flashing lights of warships hovering above. Shadows rushed down from the attacking ships, bringing with them a rain of laser fire that swept across the ground. The Reaper Hound's mercenary force had landed. The warriors in black armor slowly advanced, plasma weapons glowing brightly in their hands. They were not regular Nexus closer troops, but the most notorious mercenary force in the galaxy, specializing in carrying out massacres without leaving a trace. Kane saw the skull wolf head symbol on their shoulder armor, the sign of the Reaper Hounds. He went pale. This was not just an attack, this was a purge. A distorted voice boomed over the loudspeaker system.
Eradicate all traces. Leave no survivors.
Karin roared, raising his weapon.
Xylarians, fight.
Immediately, Xylarian warriors rushed out of the structures, jumping from the high rooftops, energy spears and melee weapons blazing. They didn't have laser guns like the enemy, but they had speed, ferocity, and familiar surroundings. Spears flew towards the Reaper Hounds, hitting their high-tech armor, creating bursts of electricity. Roars echoed as the two sides clashed in a whirlwind of war. Far away, from the southern mountain, a giant burst of light erupted. The ground shook violently, cracks spreading across the hard stone floor. From the depths of the earth, a low roar rose, not of a machine, but of a living creature. Genesis 9 was not just a weapon. It was a living entity. Kayla turned to Kane, her eyes burning with alarm.
We have to stop it, right now.
Kane nodded, gasping, if it breaks free from the seal, nothing can stop it. Without hesitation, both of them, along with Karin and a group of Xylarian warriors, rushed towards the mountain. Kayla, Kane, Karin, and a group of Xylarian warriors rushed through the dense forests of the planet. The giant ancient trees covered the sky, but in the distance, they could see the bright red light emanating from the area sealing Genesis 9. When they reached the foot of the mountain, they didn't see any gates or entrances, only smooth cliffs stretching out, as if this mountain was completely natural. Kayla frowned.
How can something emit such strong light from within, but not have any openings?
Karin placed his hand on the cliff, tapping lightly.
Hollow. There's something inside.
Kane took the Spectrax 5, scanning along the rock surface. The screen displayed a strange signal. This isn't natural rock. This whole mountain is a protective shell. And we're standing right in front of a gate. Kane took a step back, grabbed the Spectrax 5 from his belt, and activated the scan mode. The screen displayed a hidden structure beneath the rock. Strange veins shimmered like an artificial network of veins running along the mountain's surface. This isn't natural rock, Kane said, his voice full of certainty. This entire mountain is a protective shell. We are standing right in front of a gate. Kayla frowned.
Then where's the gate?
Kane placed his hand on the rock surface. A cold ray of light glided across his palm. A voice sounded, not from a living creature, but from a system that had slept for centuries. Identity verification. Valid DNA sample. Unlocking. The ground shook. The cracks in the mountain face glowed, as if waking up. A rumble echoed in the earth as giant stones shifted, revealing a dark opening, leading deep into the heart of the mountain. Kayla looked around, her hand tightening on the spear shaft.
This place is not a cave. This is a human base.
Kane stepped forward, his eyes stopping at a familiar symbol, carved on the metal wall, the symbol of the Interstellar Alliance. Not just a base. His voice dropped. This is where Genesis 9 was sealed. Xylarian warriors immediately spread out, one group continuing to run towards the sealing vault with Kayla and Kane, while the others began to set up a defensive line. Karin and the Xylarian warriors set up a defensive line at the entrance to the Genesis 9 area. They used melee weapons and the Xylarian's signature biological traps to gain an advantage over the technologically advanced enemy. Karin signaled the warriors to place biological trigger devices. When the enemy stepped in, they would release a paralyzing gas. Some other warriors climbed the surrounding cliffs, ready to ambush from above. Karin gripped his weapon tightly, looking into the distance. The Reaper Hound ships had already begun to appear in the sky.
Hold your positions. Don't let them get through.
Kane, Kayla, and the group of Xylarian warriors entered the dark corridor. The green light from the energy crystals along the rock face flickered dimly, reflecting on the ancient metal surface. The ground shook slightly, deep rumbling sounds echoing from within. Genesis 9 was no longer sleeping. They reached a giant chamber, the center of the ceiling area. At the bottom of the room, a giant structure emerged, a biological entity encased in a black metal shell. Cables and energy conduits plugged deep into its body, pulses of bright red energy running along the biological shell. Genesis 9's eyes gradually opened, two burning blue glows in the darkness. Kane took a step back, muttering, "It is alive." An electronic voice sounded from the system. Reactivation mode -85% complete. Control signal awaiting confirmation from Nexus Clursa. Kayla clenched her fist.
If we don't do something, the Reaper Hounds will get here and activate it completely.
Kane quickly scanned the data with the Spectrax 5, searching for a vulnerability in the system. He realized a single option. Genesis 9 couldn't be destroyed by conventional weapons, but it could be disabled by triggering a forced evolution state. Kane explained, "It's a biological entity. If we force it to evolve faster than it can handle, it will self-destruct." Kayla frowned, gritting her teeth.
Then do it.
Kane rushed to the control center, where Genesis 9's core system was kept in a bioalloy isolation chamber. He gripped the Spectrax 5 tightly, turning to look at Kayla and the Xylarian warriors. They didn't know what he was about to do. Kayla looked at him, her red eyes reflecting suspicion. She could sense something wasn't right.
Kane, what is it?
He took a deep breath, and stepped close to her. "Stay back." His voice calm but firm. Kayla raised an eyebrow.
Why?
Kane placed the Spectra X5 in her hand, his eyes more serious than ever. "You and everyone else need to stand at least 50 steps away from this area. Genesis 9 has a defense mechanism. It cannot complete the disintegration process if Xylarian DNA is within range of it." Kayla, eyes frowned in anger mixed with fear.
What about you?
Kane smiled gently. "I don't have Xylarian DNA." Kane took a deep breath, and then suddenly pulled her into a tight embrace. "When I give the sign, press this button. It will activate a temporary protective shield for me. I'll get out in time." Kayla looked at him, her sharp eyes reflecting suspicion.
Are you sure?
He hesitated slightly, a faint smile gliding across his lips. "Trust me. I love you." Kayla hesitated, but finally took the Spectrax 5, her palm tightening. Kane turned back, walking to the central control panel of Genesis 9. The ancient system emitted gentle vibrations, the outdated characters of science from centuries ago flickering on the interface. If not stopped right now, Genesis 9 would destroy all of Xylar. He took a deep breath, then pressed the button to activate the forced disintegration process. A surge of bright blue energy burst from the control center, sweeping across the entire area. Genesis 9 emitted a deep roar, its giant body beginning to shrink. Kane turned back, his eyes meeting Kayla's. He raised his hand, giving the signal. "Now." Kayla gritted her teeth, pressing the button on the Spectrax 5. But instead of activating the protective shield, an electronic voice sounded from the device.
"Hello, successor of Kane Lyrian, scientist from the planet Nexus Clursa."
Kayla was stunned. "What?" She looked up. But Kane was gone. The energy vortex from Genesis 9 engulfed him, pulling him down to the center of the biological storm. The entire space was bent by the intense vortex of the disintegration process. Genesis 9 collapsed, its entire biological system forced into a state of forced disintegration. The streaks of blue light gradually faded, the tremor stopped. Kayla screamed, rushing towards him.
Kane!
The entire base shook one last time, then fell silent. Kayla knelt on the scorched ground, her hand still gripping the Spectrax 5, as if it were the only thing left of him. Her hand touched the air. Only a cold void remained, where Kane had just stood. The Xylarian warriors stood around her, no one speaking a word. On the screen of the Reaper Hound's commander, an urgent message appeared.
Primary target destroyed. Heavy losses. Retreat immediately.
A brief moment of silence enveloped the battlefield. Then, one by one, the Reaper Hound's warships activated their shields, turned, and activated their escape engines. Streaks of blue light from the jet engines tore through the sky as they hastily fled Xylar's atmosphere. On the ground, Karin and the Xylarian warriors realized what was happening. They're running away. A warrior roared, pointing to the sky. Kayla looked up, her red eyes burning with a new flame fury.
Destroy all remaining Reaper Hounds. Layers of Xylarian warriors rushed into the firestorm of the Reaper Hounds, no one hesitating. Glowing spears flew, energy blades drew lines of death. Layer after layer fell, another rose, like a raging wave engulfing the entire mercenary force. No one escaped, no one was spared. The land of Xylar was cleansed, those who dared to invade were now nothing but ruins buried under this very land.
The Xylarian council gathered in the ruined stone square. No one spoke a word. They had fought for the wrong ideals for too long, only to realize they were just puppets in someone else's hands. Karin, who had once despised Cain, stood silently among the surviving Xylarian warriors. His hand tightened on the hilt of his weapon, but not to fight. He looked down at the ground beneath his feet, where only a few hours ago Cain had stood beside them, and now only a cold void remained. He took a deep breath, stepping forward. I once thought humans only brought destruction to Xylar. His voice was hoarse. But he protected us. No one objected. Kayla didn't cry. Her eyes stared blankly at the sky where Genesis 9 had once existed, where Cain had disappeared. She gripped the Spectrax 5 tightly in her hand. Then, without a word, she turned away. No one stopped her. They understood that she needed time. The path to the primeval forest was unusually quiet. All the sounds of battle had receded, leaving only the sound of the wind through the towering leaves, occasionally bringing a few yellow leaves that lightly touched the ground. Kayla walked, not in a hurry, not hesitating. She knew exactly where she was going. The glowing stream still flowed, as peaceful as if nothing had ever changed. The gentle blue light reflected on the smooth stones, illuminating each branch reaching out in the darkness. This was where she had first brought Cain. It was where they had shared a rare peaceful moment. In her hand was still the Spectrax 5, the only thing Cain left behind. She activated it.
Hello, successor of Cain Lyrian, scientist from the planet Nexus Clersa.
Then, for a moment, the water reflected an image Cain's face, with a faint, challenging smile, his eyes as deep as the first time they met. Galaxies stretched across the sky, clusters of blue-purple stars emitting a cold but enchanting light, like the very soul of this planet. In the farthest place, near the edge of the horizon, a star shone brighter than all the rest. It quietly illuminated, as if an eye watching the world below, witnessing what remained after all. Kayla gripped it tightly, whispering,
You were always here, weren't you?